My Gavanen Melonin, and well met indeed. I am Arakir Galadirthan, the head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer. Welcome back to Divide and Conquer for a video that has been oft requested. And if successful, we can branch this out to cover other unit types. But of course, this is a countdown video, ever popular on YouTube. Most of the channels I subscribe to are countdown videos, actually. But and I thought we should finally settle once and for all which cavalry unit is the best. So, in order to test this, first of all, I compiled all of the stats of all of the units and put them into a very rudimentary table, assigned a certain score depending on who was highest, and listed them that way. This gave me a general idea of, statistically, who should maybe be the best. I then allowed the AI to control each cavalry unit and pitted them all against each other to see who would win in one-on-one situations between just those two cavalry units. Brief addendum on that point, if I controlled one of the cavalry units, no matter which one of these 10 units I used, I always won. Because the AI is garbage. So I had to use the AI's innate garbageness to fight against themselves. Otherwise it was unfair. And then finally, I used Gondor Spearmen and just head-on charged directly into the Spearmen with each unit of cavalry. And compiled who got the most kills in that initial charge, because that was what I was testing that for. I then went back to my graph, adjusted it depending upon who beat whom, and indeed then who was the best in terms of charging. And that has given me my list. Now the final point before we dive onto the first one is to say that nothing campaign related has affected these scores. I have not taken into account how much they cost, how quickly they train, how quickly they then replenish, how many regions they can be trained from. I haven't done any of that. So this is a purely battle-based video. No campaign aspect has been used because it's almost impossible to quantify how much better it makes XY unit if it can be trained in 4 places or 6 places, for example. And most of these units are restricted in one way or another, so it would have just been a nightmare. So I do hope you enjoy this new video style. Feedback obviously very welcome, but otherwise let's dive in. Starting us off at number 10 is one of the game's actual cavalry nations, but sadly their only offering, and this is Khan's Warlords Cataphracts. Now working in their favour was one of the largest unit sizes at 60 men per battalion, but unfortunately they just suffer too much with a low armour and defence, and unfortunately no shield. One of only 2 units in the top 10 here who don't actually have a shield. They do get a little bit of a bonus because they scare enemy infantry, which not every cavalry unit does, but on the whole they lost to everyone else quite soundly. And unfortunately in the charge test they performed very poorly, killing a very minor amount of the Gondor Spearmen in their initial charge. So at number 10 it's Warlords Cataphracts. At number 9 we have one of the game's most favoured cavalry units, but once you take all of the campaign aspects out, my Jove are they poorer than I thought, and it is of course the Lok Inas Rim of Rhûn. Now again, like the Cataphracts, they've got the second highest unit size at 60 men per battalion, but their attack is criminally low, and actually the second lowest in the entirety of this top 10, with their secondary attack also being one of the poorest. Now again, the real thing that lets them down is no shield, meaning their defense is very, very low. They don't scare enemy infantry, they don't scare enemy cavalry, and their morale is actually quite low. In fact, their morale is the second lowest in the top 10 here again. In the charge test, however, they did kill 18% of the spearmen, but sadly it was just not enough. And so really low down are one of the most iconic cavalry units, the Lok Inas Rim. Number 8 is another of the game's actual cavalry nations, and again their only offering, and it is the Royal Guard of Rohan. They have a very middling unit size at 50 men per battalion, which is slightly more, and it is actually almost bang in the middle. But again, a very low attack, a not incredible charge, and just unfortunately nothing really standing out to make them really take the top spots. They get a morale bonus to them and everyone around them, but again quite low morale to begin with anyway, And the Royal Guard only killed 12% of the Gondor spearmen in the initial charge. They just did not have what it takes. They are held back a little bit by their barded horse, of all things, which is actually worse on the charge than some of the non-barded horses, which is almost counterintuitive. But nevertheless, the Royal Guard did not do very well in the one-on-ones, and with very low kills in the Spearman charge, it is the Royal Guard. Standing at number 7 then is a unit that you might not have expected, but it's Camul's Shadow Knights. They've actually got one of the lowest, or joint lowest, unit sizes in the entirety of this top 10. Their attack is really nothing to scream from the rooftops, and neither is their secondary attack, but they're boosted up by their overall high defense of 30. They have no attributes to speak of, no fear or no morale boosting, but their morale itself is a little bit better at 21, if you wish to know. In the test, however, the Shadow Knights again only claiming 12% of the Spearman charge test. But where they stood and in order to gain the 7 spot really was that they were just better than the 3 beneath them. And that allowed them to clinch it. They came very, very close actually to killing certain units that are higher than them, which gave them some props, but overall 7 was a perfect positioning for them, as they are excellent cavalry, but they're not incredible. And so Camul's Shadow Knights sit at number 7. Now at number 6 we have a unit that was very, very interesting indeed. This is Mordor's Temple Knights, the Dark Númenóreans atop their dark horses. Now these performed incredibly well in the one-on-ones, killing an awful lot of the other cavalry units, but they were the worst on the charge by some margin, and brace yourself for this, they only killed in their first charge into Gondor spearmen 3%. To give you an idea of the unit amongst these top 10 that got the best, which you'll find out soon enough, the best charge was 39%. And the Temple Knights only got 3%. So despite their pretty good attack stat of 12 and solid armour, overall total defence of 33, with 18 of that being armour, they scare enemy cavalry, they scare enemy infantry, they increase the morale of units around them, and their morale stands at 20, which unfortunately was the second lowest on the list. Their fear to other cavalry gave them a huge boost in the one-on-ones, but I could not negate how abysmal they were in the charge. And so, sitting quite low down at number 6 are the Temple Knights of Mordor. We break then into the top 5 with the Arthedain Royal Guard. One of the more aesthetically pleasing units, but that did not affect the decision at all, but they look damned good. They have 50 men per battalion, but unfortunately their attack is the joint second lowest, or second joint lowest, as in a lot of people have 9 attack in this top 10. Their secondary attack, however, is 12, which is pretty good, but obviously, as we will see, not the best. Their overall defense at 30 reigns quite good as well. That places them with the joint second highest defense, which is another contributory factor to their overall skill and the reason why they take the 5th spot. They also cause fear in infantry units, which is helpful in longer battles, and they give morale to their own troops, which adds some weight as well. But it's really their performance in the 1v1s that shows them in the 5th spot here, and that they weren't too bad in the charge. They got 17% of the spearmen in the charge, so taking the 5th spot quite, I think, deservedly, are the Arthedain Royal Guard. At number 4 is a unit that really, really surprised me and was actually on point for coming first until I conducted the second test charging into the spearmen, and that is the Tirith Iar Knights, Dol Amroth's first entry, hint hint nudge nudge, on this list. The Tirith Iar Knights, when you look at their stats, seem very, very subpar. They have 50 men in their battalion, which is okay. Their attack is 8, but their charge is 6. That is far and away the worst charge of any unit on this list. Most charges here, the average charge is 12 or 13, and they have 6. Their total defense is 28, so it's still very good, but erring on the lower side in this top 10 list. Their morale is only 20, but their armor piercing. And they beat every other unit in this list in the 1v1s. They absolutely decimated. And so if this was purely 1v1, the Tirith Iar would be the top spot. But in the charge, they did abysmally. 8 2% of the spearmen fell in the initial charge to the Tirith-Ayar Knights. Second lowest, second only, of course, to the pathetic Temple Knights, which meant that the Tirith-Ayar dropped from first way down to fourth. So whilst they might beat other cavalry, they're not going to do very much as a traditional cavalry charging unit, and for that I deducted them. So coming in at number 4, the Tirith-Ayar Knights. We break then into the top 3, and a unit that, again, I don't think people may have expected to feature so highly. Azog's Defilers, or if you're playing DAC version 2.2, Bolg's Champions. These people surprised me incredibly. Their size is the largest at 62.5 men per battalion. Obviously, it rounds it to 61, I think. Or 62, sorry. Their attack is the highest of any unit on the list at 14. Their charge is joint highest at 15, but their armour is the worst at 18. They have no attributes to speak of, and of course they are actually camels, not horses. The morale is also the lowest at 18, so they do terribly, really, across the board in all of these stats. They have excellent attack, excellent charge, and then very average armour and morale. But their size and their high attack help them in the 1v1 incredibly, and they beat most other units, only losing really to the 2 that are above them, and position 4 and 5, Tirith-Ayar and Arthedain. Everyone else they beat easily. But the reason they push right up to 3rd is because they were the winners of the charge test, claiming 39% of the Gondor spearmen in the initial charge. Incredible attack and aggression there, earning them, I think, deservedly the 3rd spot. So it is Azog's Defilers / Bolg's Champions for the Goblins of Moria / the Orcs of the Misty Mountains, coming in for number 3. Though it pains me to admit that this unit is second, unfortunately I simply could not give them the top spot, and so it is with a heavy heart that I am pleased to let you know that the Knights of the Silver Swan, Dol Amroth's finest, were only second. They have 50 men per battalion, which helps them out a little bit, having that extra 10 from the lowest number, which is 40. Their attack in their initial charge was the joint second lowest at 9, unfortunately, but their secondary attack again was 12, which is okay. Their charge is 14, second highest, which was pretty good, and they are helped by having the joint highest total defense. I keep using armour interchangeably with defence, and that's a mistake, but their total defence stat is 33. They're boosted on this list because they give morale bonuses to those around them, and they scare infantry around them. And they have the highest morale at 25. They are also locked, so they will not run away, which also worked in their favour. They claimed 18% of the Gondor spearmen in the charge, which, whilst not the most amazing numbers, as you'll see in a moment, and of course with Azog there already, it was enough to certainly earn them the second spot. Now, before the Tirith-Ayar Knights came along, the Knights of the Silver Swan beat every other unit in the 1v1. So they are, of course, very deserving of the spot. They look the best on the list. They come from the best nation. They're objectively the best, but unfortunately they aren't really, and they only come second, the Knights of the Silver Swan. I think it will come as no surprise to anyone really who's paid much attention to cavalry in Divide and Conquer over its 6-year lifespan that the Eldarinway Lancers of Mithlond and Imladris are, of course, number 1. Now, if campaign was a feature, I think they would definitely not have taken the top spot, but in the testing that we've done here, they do. They have 40 men in the battalion, the lowest number. Their initial attack is 12, which is the second highest. Their secondary attack is 16, which is the highest of these 10. Their charge is 15, which is also joint highest, and their defense is 30, their overall defense, which is joint second. You're noticing that they are coming top or second in a lot of these stats. They have no attributes though, which put them down a bit, and their morale is only 22, but again is also locked, so that stood them in excellent stead. But the reason that they finally clinched it, because you will remember from the Knights of the Silver Swan that they actually lost to the Silver Swan in the 1v1. Repeatedly they lost. It was damned close, but they did always lose. but they claimed 32% of the spearmen, the second highest in the charge, meaning that performing as actual cavalry, they are certainly deserving of the top spot. When taken as a whole, they beat Azog's Defilers despite losing in the charge test. They were incredible. And so the Eldarinway Lancers, as sad as I am to say it, are number one and are divide and conquers on the battle map. Undisputed cavalry unit. So before we wrap up the video, a few attempts to preempt questions. Number one, as mentioned already in the video, I did get armor and total defense muddled up a few times, but I meant total defense unless I was directly relating to the armor number, which should have been on the screen. Secondly, the secondary attack is what some cavalry have when they swap away from their lance or their spear and then they draw their sword, if you are unsure or didn't really know what that bit was. The other final point to make is that this was all tested on the currently unreleased version of Divide and Conquer, as it is in our developer's build. So whatever the next version is going to be called, it was tested on that. So if some of the units looked slightly different or the stats were slightly different to your game, it's because this was recorded on and around the 19th of September, and so the stats were taken then as a snapshot. The things might be different in your game. But I do hope you've enjoyed this video. I do hope I've kept it relatively brief and engaging. I hope you've enjoyed whatever video wizardry I've done in the background testing my video editing chops. And depending on the reception of the video and feedback, I'm eager to potentially do this for each unit class. Let me know your feedback, let me know your thoughts, and until we speak again, dear friends, Navair Naden Perimad Melunin, and farewell.